I feel the master. I feel them. Y'all ready? They ready. Well, come on. Well, come on. Y'all ready? They ready. We ready.
All right, so today we're going to tune up this bicycle here, and we're looking at something with a linear pole brake system, and then traditional front and rear derailleurs with trigger shifters. So the only thing you're going to need for doing these tune-ups is a Phillips screwdriver, and then everything else will just be able to tune up using the barrel adjusters on the derailleurs and the shifters themselves. So we're going to begin by adjusting the brakes. What we're going to do is we're going to use this set screw here to adjust for the spacing of the pad between the rim and, well, the space between the pad and the rim itself. So if you decide to screw in that set screw, it'll push the lever out, and if you decide to loosen that screw, it allows for the brake to get closer to the rim itself. So you want to use that to adjust the brake in such a way where you get equal spacing between the rim and the brake pad on this side as well as on the opposite side. And you can center those, you can recenter the brake pads if you go up to the brake handle and you just squeeze the brakes a couple times. And then you can repeat the process of screwing in or screwing out that screw until you have that gap centered in there. So this part here, this is the barrel adjuster for your brakes. In this case, this is for the rear brakes. So when you're adjusting the tension in the back of the bike on that set screw to center those brake pads, you're going to be left with even spacing on both sides, and you're going to want to tighten up the brakes themselves. So look at the tension that you have in your brake handle. If you want more tension in those brakes, you're going to want to loosen that barrel adjuster. And when you have it where you like it, you're going to have to lock down the lock nut up against the brake assembly here. If you don't like how tight your brakes are, it's just the opposite. So you're going to loosen that nut and then screw the barrel adjuster in until you reach a point where you like the tension that's in your brake handle. So once we have set up the brakes and centered them, both the front and the rear, we're going to start focusing on the derailleur system, the shifting system in the back of the bike. So starting with the rear derailleur, we're going to have to shift into the highest numbered gear on the shifters. Whenever you shift, you want to have the pedals rolling so the chain is moving across the cogs, and then just drop the chain into the smallest size gear, the highest numbered gear on your shifter. In our case, we're shifted all the way into the highest numbered gear, but the chain is on the second smallest cog. So we have to adjust for this by using what's called the limit screws, which you find on the back of the derailleur. There's going to be an L and an H labeled screw. In this case, since we're looking at what would be considered the high end of the gear range, we're going to use the H screw, so H for high. And what we're going to do is we're going to loosen the H screw as we pedal until the chain drops into that smallest gear, and the cogs on the rear derailleur are centered and in line with that smallest cog. Once you have that set, what you're going to do is you're going to begin to shift back one gear at a time. So in our case, we shifted one gear back, but as we look, the chain hasn't gone up into the second smallest gear yet. And so we have to somehow put more tension into the system. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the barrel adjuster on the rear derailleur. Sometimes they are on the back of the shifter on the front of the bike, but in this case it's in the back of the derailleur. And we're going to loosen that barrel adjuster until we see it drop into that second smallest gear. And once again, once those cogs on the rear derailleur are in line with that second smallest gear, then you know that we actually have the full adjustment. So to check your work, go ahead and drop the gear back down to the highest numbered gear, and then just roll back one at a time until you reach the top. Now in the case of this bike, the smallest cogs, the cogs on the back of the rear derailleur here, are already in line with the largest cog, or would be considered the lowest numbered gear on your shifters. So you don't have to worry about adjusting with that set screw. But in the case if you had to tune that up, and you had to set that set screw, by loosening that set screw, it'll cause the chain to go towards the wheel and by tightening it, it'll cause it to come away from the wheel. So you're going to use those screws, both on the high and the low, in terms of the highest and lowest gears here, to center those two small sprockets on the rear derailleur with either that highest or largest gear and that smallest gear as well. Alright, so once you've adjusted your rear derailleur, you move up to the front. On the front, you want to go ahead and drop the shifter down to the lowest gear, which ends up being the smallest sized gear here. So it's the lowest numbered, equates to the smallest in terms of size on the front. And right away looking at this, it looks like it's shifted down perfectly, so we don't have to actually adjust the barrel tension, but we do have to adjust these limit screws here. So just like the rear of the bike, you also have a set of limit screws on the front, and they are labeled either H and L or high and low. And so in this case, we're going to adjust the low screw because it's on the lowest side here, or with the lowest gear. And so you're going to want to start to tighten that lowest screw until you hear it start to rub against the chain, and then back it off about a half a turn. And that's usually about good on the adjustment of the limit screw. And then you're just going to want to roll through the gears here. Just make sure there's no rubbing. So once you've gone up in the second gear, if it hasn't shifted up in the second, you want to add some tension using the barrel adjuster on the front, and you'll just loosen it up until it shifts into the second gear. If it does enter into the second gear, like in this case it did, if you hear any rubbing, you're going to want to loosen that barrel adjuster until it stops rubbing, and then go ahead and tighten it up again by loosening the barrel adjuster so that it just starts to rub a little bit. You generally speaking don't get a full clearance in the front derailleur between the highest gear and the lowest gear on the back. So you just want to cover that middle set of gears. So everything but the far extremes of your rear cogs. So in this case, you just want to shift up into the highest numbered gear on the rear, and you want to do that one at a time. And I'm hearing just a little bit of rubbing on that last gear, that smallest gear on the back, when I'm in the second gear on the front, which is what we want to hear. You just want rubbing, as I said, on the smallest gear and the largest gear. So in this case, this derailleur on the front is set pretty well in terms of the adjustment as far as the tension in the cable goes. Once you've got your first and second gears done on the front, shift it into the highest gear, which ends up being the largest gear on the front. Once you've done that, you want to check to see that the chain is not rubbing against the front derailleur up here. If it is rubbing, you're going to want to use that H screw, or your high screw, for your limit screw, to adjust so that you don't have any rubbing going on. So in our case, we do have some rubbing, so we're going to have to actually loosen that H screw until the rubbing goes away. So once the rubbing has gone away, then you know you have your chain all in adjustment, and just go ahead and check your work and make sure that you have the tolerances that you want. And just like that, that's how you perform a basic tune-up on your bicycle.